When I started publishing in, the late 80s, early 90s, every year people were telling me, boy, this is the worst time ever to get into publishing. This is the worst time ever to try to be a writer. This is the worst time ever. And I heard that for decades. I got to say that this is the best time ever to get into publishing, that you have so many doors open to you. You have so many possibilities, so many career paths. It really used to be everybody had to do it one way and only 1/10 of 1% ever made it. Well, that's not the case anymore.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 357 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Kevin J. Anderson. Kevin has published more than 180 books, 58 of which have been national or international bestsellers. He has 24 million copies in print in 34 languages. He's written books in the Star Wars, X-Files, and Dune universes, as well as in the Clockwork Angels steampunk trilogy with legendary Rush drummer Neil Peart. Kevin's original works include the Saga of Seven Sons series, The Wake the Dragon, and Terra Incognita fantasy trilogies, and the humorous Dan Shamble Zombie PI series, and the Dragon Business series. Now we talk about Kevin's writing, how Kickstarter has changed his perspective about indie author release strategies, and the forthcoming 50 years of short stories collected in 7 volumes Kickstarter that he is launching in late April 2024. But first, let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor.
Ready to elevate your writing career? Join the Cruising Writers Group Sailing the Caribbean from Galveston on February 22nd to March 1st, 2025. This time, we're focused on indie authors, with special guests Mark Leslie and Aaron Wright leading a deep dive into the world of self-publishing. You'll come away with invaluable insights, but also great memories as you connect with other writers and explore charming ports of call in Roatan, Honduras, Costa Maya, Mexico, and Cozumel. Visit cruisingwriters.com to book your spot today.
So I am recording this episode early. We're recording this on April 21st. On the 22nd of April, I fly to Los Angeles to take part in the Writers of the Future Annual Conference. I will be there with Kevin and so many other amazing folks, as well as the winners of the Writers of the Future. And it's going to be a fantastic week. So I'm recording this just to get it pre-scheduled. But if you can't tell, for anyone who's been following along, I got another cold. It's the strangest thing. I couldn't shake this cold I had for about a month. I was starting to feel better, and then just a few days ago, it hit me again. So what I've been doing the last couple of days is actually taking naps in the afternoon, which I never do. I mean, the last cold I had, I worked through it. I just kept going and kept plugging away. But on Saturday afternoon and this Sunday today, I'm going to take a nap. Went to bed at like 7 p.m., got a full 8/9 hours of sleep, even though I was in bed for 12 hours because, tossing and turning and coughing and hacking. But I'm doing everything I can not to mask the symptoms. I want my body to fight this damn thing. And so I'm actually feeling a lot better today, believe it or not, but you can't tell from the sound of my voice. So on Tuesday is when I'm doing the first workshop session for the Writers of the Future. So I'm planning on feeling better by then. So anyways, all that to say is I am recording this early to get this episode pre-scheduled for this week. I do have a couple updates that I wanted to share. And so here's a couple important things from comments from recent episodes. The quote attribute I did in episode 355, Scribbling Pen Publishing with Melanie Gilbert and Heather Karn. I got this comment from Don King, who you'll hear in a forthcoming episode of the podcast. Don says, "Hi Mark, the quotation you closed with has several versions, most of them attributed to Maya Angelou rather than Toni Morrison. The most common form is, and this is the quote I was trying to quote, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that was the expression I was trying to share. And of course I got it wrong. And so Don goes on to say, however, and this is fascinating, it appears that there's no evidence that as great a poet as she was, she ever said that. More than anyone would want to know about it is at this link, and I'll drop the link in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. Don goes on to say, whoever said it gets shared a lot because it is spot on true. So correct. And thank you, Don, for letting me know about that so I could share it here. Because, I made a mistake and I want to own it. But I also want to pay tribute to two amazing writers. So I thought I'm going to share real quotes and look them up and do the research from two authors. And the first one I came up with from Maya Angelou was, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And I love that. I think that's phenomenal. Of course, when I looked into it, it's often been attributed to Maya Angelou, but I couldn't find evidence that it actually was. So it was just attributed to her. But that's a great quote. So I went to one that was attributed to her and can be traced back. And this was Maya Angelou saying, try to be a rainbow in someone's cloud. Again, beautiful, love it. And Maya Angelou said that in a letter to her daughter. So there you go. We can trace it back to where it came from. And Toni Morrison, who accidentally attributed that other quote to, Toni Morrison, this quote, I'm sure writers have heard, but if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And Toni Morrison said this in a 1981 speech to the Ohio Arts Council. I'm so lucky that we have so many writers that can inspire us and we can go back to those wonderful quotes. And I want to say thank you, huge thank you to Don, who is a professional speaker. Therefore, wants attribution to be correct because when he delivers his passion, which he does on his podcast as well. And I'll have a link to a recent interview I did on Don's podcast, and he will be coming up in a future episode. But thank you so much, Don, for that. I appreciate that. And then over on the Twitter sphere, at Edwin Downward said, this is for episode 356, which is the mid-list indie author mindset with T-Thorn Coyle. Edwin said, heard an author on the latest Stark Reflections with Mark Leslie talk about the realities of being a modern mid-list author. So much of the material out there is aimed at either the beginner or the established 6 to 7 figure author. This talk was refreshing to hear. And I couldn't agree with you more, Edwin. The reality of publishing is, yes, there's more opportunities than ever before for writers, which Kevin and I talk about in this interview. But the reality is that most authors are not going to hit that 6 and 7 figure. And that's not to be negative, but it's to say that there's a better opportunity for authors to actually be mid-list authors. And the mid-list has grown dramatically thanks to the advent of self-publishing. So thank you for that comment, Edwin. Thank you for the comment. Don, I just want to remind people you can leave comments over at starkreflections.ca. Love to hear your comments because it does make this a community and a bit of a conversation. And I kind of love that. But considering how horrible my voice is, I'm just going to roll right in to this interview with Kevin J. Anderson. Hey, Kevin, welcome back to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Well, always glad to come back when I have something to say, which is kind of always, or another project to promote, which is kind of always.
So. I know, and I've got to get you a T-shirt or something or a mug for returning guest as one of those guests who's been back a number of times. But you've got some exciting news. So you're about to launch. Wait a second. You're about to launch what number Kickstarter is this now?
The one that I've run. This is number 5, I think, and we can talk. We can talk in a little bit, and every single one of them has funded at least 10 times what I asked for.
Whoa! And
we can talk, but the Kickstarters has just totally upended my career in a good way, in my way of doing writing and publishing. It's just incredible, and I've got my biggest one yet coming up, and I hope you'll let me talk about it.
Oh, for sure. I'd love to. But for anyone who's not familiar with Kevin J. Anderson, I will have links to all the previous episodes you've been in the show notes, but just a high level view of your background, because you're looking at Kickstarters as an additional additional thing to add to your publishing with the quiver of arrows that you use for publishing?
Yeah. So boy, I've been around for more than my first novel was published in 1988, and that was Resurrection Inc. And that was another thing we talked about because it was inspired by a Rush album and
Yeah.
led to my lifelong friendship with Neil Peart. But so 1988 and that was 35 years ago. And I started publishing short stories before that, but I've been around a lot, but I've been kind of like an author surfer riding these waves of the publishing industry because boy, believe me, there are some high points and there are some big low troughs. And
Right.
I started out obviously in traditional publishing. My first book was from Signet Books and paperback, and I went through Bantam and HarperCollins and Tor Books and Simon and Schuster and Ace and Rock and like all of these
Yeah.
publishers. Um, and I give a whole talk on this called The Perfect Storm about how publishing kind of collapsed and led everything was in order to create the whole indie publishing movement. And I was kind of there right when the starting gun fired, or right when the asteroid hit the dinosaurs, if you want to put it that way.
A little bit of
And
both,
so,
maybe.
and that was in like 2009 or so when like literally sea change, like the Berlin Wall falling and the Industrial Revolution starting, when indie publishing just got its rockets lit under it and going like crazy. And
Right.
I still continue to publish with major publishers. Tor Books just released one of my novels about 6 months ago, a new Dune novel. So all the Dune novels I write with Brian Herbert, those are obviously kind of big international deals. So we want big publishers with big footprints for those. But back in 2009, I started publishing my own things, reissuing my backlist and publishing books by some friends, and founded WordFire Press. And then I had to learn how to do all that and publish books and run Amazon ads and get them listed all over the place, and then printing my own books. And it has just been it's a marathon with no finish line in sight. But it's this when I started publishing in the late 80s, early 90s, every year people were telling me, boy, this is the worst time ever to get into publishing. This is the worst time ever to try to be a writer. This is the worst time ever. And I heard that for decades. I got to say that this is the best time ever to get into publishing, that you have so many doors open to you. You have so many possibilities, so many career paths. It really used to be everybody had to do it one way and only 1/10 of 1% ever made it. Well, that's not the case anymore. You're now we're like a herd of cats just going all over the place and doing things. And like I said, I found my own publishing house. I published my own books. As you well know, I teach a publishing master's degree at Western Colorado University. And I still work. I still have a New York literary agent. I still work with Tor Books and some with Bantam and some with other major publishers. But I also publish my own stuff. And as we started out this conversation, just 2 years ago was my very first Kickstarter. And suddenly that instead of opening a new door, it just sort of like used dynamite and blew out one of the walls.
Wow.
And it just like it changed all of my possibilities of projects that I wanted to do that were not feasible under the old umbrella. And it depends on you, the author or creator, and a lot of Kickstarters flop. But if you get them right, it is the direct plug-in between creator and audience. There's not 35 middlemen in the center. It is me to my high-end fans who want that book right now. And it's just this great, not a drug analogy, but you're like mainlining stuff instead of
Right.
putting it in the diffuse way.
But it didn't always feel like that, right? I just thought it was, oh, it's just another thing to learn. It's another platform that people are raving about. How did that change for you? Like your perspective on what a Kickstarter could mean to the brand of Kevin J. Anderson?
Well, and he's a friend of both of ours. Dean Wesley Smith has run lots of Kickstarters with his whole team at WMG Publishing. And he's, in fact, I think they run one just about every month for something of theirs. In my uneducated mind, I always kind of had this feeling that, well, a Kickstarter was for kind of like whiny authors who didn't have any money, who were basically saying, give me money and I'll give you a book. And I thought, well, I'm publishing with major publishers and I've got a fan base, and I don't need to stand there with my tin cup out saying, give me some money so I can publish a book. Well, Dean really straightened me out, and he couldn't be more right. What he made me realize is that a Kickstarter isn't just, I'm desperate for money, give me some so I can publish a book. It is you opening up a VIP backstage club to your core fans, that you are creating a new thing, whether it's a special edition book or whether it's specialty coffee mugs or a signed limited edition or something that is only available to the people who back your Kickstarter. Or if it's not only available, they get it months before anybody else does.
Right, right.
So they're like the first look. They're the inner circle, that these are the people who are your true fans and they can support it. And he convinced me. Now, the circumstances behind that, I have a series that I worked on. I think the first one was published in 2012, and I just absolutely adore it. And I know your wife absolutely adores it too. It's called Dan Shamble Zombie PI. And it's like the Addams Family meets the Naked Gun. I mean, it's a dumb, funny detective. And I write these big, serious, fat, doorstop science fiction epics or fantasy epics. But the Dan Shamble books are just laugh out loud, stupid, funny, and I have 3 grandkids, so I basically get to write a book full of grandpa jokes, and that's all it is, and it really is hilarious. I loved them. The traditional publisher that I sold the first 3 to, they brought them out, but in my educated experience, they made a lot of mistakes,
right,
or at least they didn't do it the way I would have. That these are short books, they're fast, they're hilarious, and they wanted to bring them out like a year and a half apart. And I said, no, they want the next one now. You should do it fast. And then they published the book at $15 for the trade paperback, and then they charged $15 for the ebook. And then they complained that the ebook sales were disappointing. And I went, well, duh, who's going to pay that much for an ebook? So we kind of butted heads on that. And then they wanted to kill the series after 3 books. And I kind of whined and groveled, and I said, but no. And I went to my other urban fantasy friends, the Sherilyn Kenyon, Jim Butcher, Kelly Armstrong, L.A. Banks, a bunch of them. I mean, I know, and they all said, oh, well, none of their series took off before book 5 or 6.
right. Yeah.
And I said, well, how can you give up at number 3? I love Dan Shamble. Let's do one more. And so finally, they grudgingly agreed to do book number 4, and they cut my pay in half. But I did it because I really wanted to do it. And they brought it out like that. And they said, see, told you it wasn't going to work. And so that series was dead. It was as dead as the main character. I mean, it really wasn't going anywhere. But I really loved that series. And at my own WordFire Press, I ended up doing 2 short story collections.
Right.
And finally, I just went, I'm going to write my own novel. And so I wrote a new Dan Shamble novel that I just published at WordFire Press. And it came out and it did okay. And it did reasonable.
Yeah.
But it didn't do well enough to make me say, I'm going to stop writing for traditional publishers anymore. And I'm not going to. It was sort of a labor of love that didn't do much. And then I kind of gave up again. And well, that was a lot of work and it didn't pay off very much. And then I eventually got the rights back from the original publisher. Okay, so now I've got the Dan Shamble books that I can just reissue myself. Well, again, they're not going to do that fantastically. I'll just put them out there. But then Dean Smith said, well, why don't you run a Kickstarter if the fans want these so much? And I said, yeah, but Kickstarters are for whiny authors that don't have any money. And that's when he said, no, this is for your fan base. So I got a new team of artists. We redesigned the covers of all of the existing 7 books. And I said, okay, I'm going to write a brand new Dan Shamble book, and let's run a Kickstarter to see if the fans want it. And it funded at 23 times what I asked for.
Whoa.
In fact, it paid me more than 6 times what the traditional publisher had paid me the last time for the last book.
Wow.
And I went, oh, you like me. You really like me. I mean, the fans really wanted Dan Shamble. And I was so thrilled with that. And then I thought, well, that's kind of cool because I've got this other series called The Dragon Business. It's like The Princess Bride meets Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. It's another funny one. It's con men, dragon slayers, and I had written one of those books for Amazon has a mainstream publishing imprint called 47 North, and I published it with them, and it came out. But surprise, surprise, all the rest of the bookstores in the country don't like to carry books that Amazon publishes, and so it came out, but it didn't make a big splash. But again, I loved the characters. I loved the series. I wanted to do more.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, well, let's see if the Kickstarter fans want me to write a sequel to The Dragon Business. Boom, again, 20 times what I asked for. By now I'm starting to think, this is kind of a cool thing. And so I've then since run another Dan Shamble Kickstarter. Last fall, I did a big one for a science fiction novel connected to a movie I'm working on. And the writer director and I put that one out. And again, that funded at 10, 15 times what we asked for.
Wow.
So this is now changing. If I want to do a book, like this is what I want to do, not what I think I can sell to Bantam, not what I think that I can make money with if I go to HarperCollins or something.
Right.
But this is like, this is a passion project. It's a labor of love, but I've got a lot of fans. Maybe they'll actually make it worthwhile. And I've got, I think, 4 planned for the next year. I'm building up all these, and each one kind of gets more ambitious. But we have one that's just coming out right around when this podcast is being broadcast, and it's my biggest one yet. And I'm just like, I love it, and it's something I couldn't do. So
tell us like what this is, and I know it relates to my very first encounter with you was through this kind of work.
Yeah. So I've been writing short stories for a long time too, and I've got a lot of stories in science fiction, fantasy, horror, dark fantasy, and I started gathering them up. And several years ago, I had done 4 books of my selected stories, just some of my best stories that I wanted to put together and put out there.
Yeah.
And then I started really looking around, and I found, well, I have a lot more stories than this. And then I started digging even deeper, and I found magazines where I had been published in for decades ago, and collaborations and these really cool ideas. And I have put together, so here's the big ta-da thing. I'm going to run a Kickstarter for a 7-volume set of my collected short stories. So it's over 130 stories. It's about 750,000 words. And it's 3 volumes of science fiction, 2 volumes of fantasy, 2 volumes of horror and dark fantasy. And it covers like my whole career. And it has collaborations with Sherilyn Kenyon and Neil Peart and Janice Ian and Mike Resnick and Gregory Benford and Rick Wilbur and Sarah Hoyt and Christine Catherine Rush and all these people that I've worked with just over the years. And just digging these up and finding them. But here's what's really cool. And digging through all these archives, I wrote my first story when I was 8 years old. I went into my dad's study, and he had a typewriter there and a stack of pink scratch paper. And I like rolled in a piece of the pink paper, and I spent several days writing my first novel at age 8 about a mad scientist and a bunch of monsters, and they go on a rampage. And I found that original thing with the written typed on the pink paper. And so in this collection of the 7 volumes of the short stories, I'm including that first thing that I wrote when I was 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
And my first, and it's actually pretty good with lots of different storylines and characters and things. I published my very first story when I was 14. I found that one, and we're going to include that in there. And my very first professional publication, and all these things. So this 7-volume set covers 50 years of my writing career.
Wow.
Even though I'm only like 30. But
yeah, of course. How could you have done? We had a time machine,
something like that. And it's got collaborations with Neil Peart, like I said, and Cheryl and Kenyon and Mike Resnick and Janice Ian and like these friends of mine that we just hung out with and wrote stories together.
Wow.
And we went through, and it was kind of a big job just to gather all of the original publication info, the copyright info. I mean, you got all these details for the fine print in the back of it. And I gathered all that. I found them digging through these boxes. I found stories that were published that I didn't even remember. And, wow. So I'm reading them, and it was pretty cool. And then, of course, I mean, these are so old. None of them are in electronic format. So we had to scan them in, and then we get them proofed. But because this is such a personal project for me, it's not just a whole bunch of stories. Every single one of the stories I wrote a little personal introduction to. Wow. How I wrote the story, or what was the inspiration, or how it affected somebody, or some little intro for each of these 132 stories. Huh. And it just makes this a gigantic set of a career retrospective. But also, it's a whole lot of stories if you just like to read.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds amazing. I love the fact that it's a retrospective of 50 years of short stories, from the first one you wrote when you were 8 to the first actual publication at the age of 14 to your first pro sale. I mean, I love, and again, it comes with this richness of your voice today, looking back at the story, remembering, well, I had to dig to figure out what this one was about or whatever. So, and I guess I think about the collector, right? The person who's like, okay, I've read a bunch of Kevin's stories. I've read them in magazines. I have the, other short story collections, whatever. But this is a 7-volume set of everything. I know with the Dan Shamble, which I loved. I love the Dan Shamble books. I've got the complete set now in trade paperback, right? The full nice
set so far. We're going to do.
Well, I know, but that's what I have to keep collecting. And I was like, wow, I should have gotten the hardcovers. But and I think with the Dragon business, I did go with the hardcovers because I'm like, no, these are collectibles. So this is for the collector, right? This is for the because what are some of the special things that you have planned, or are you allowed to reveal some of those things yet?
Oh, I can. Well, I mean, it's going to be coming. In fact, we have a landing page now, and it's going to be launching like very shortly after this comes out. But we have. I mean, if you just want to read this stuff, you can get the ebooks. And if you just want a copy for your shelf, we're offering them in trade paperbacks. And I have really nice hardcover, dust-jacketed hardcover set if you want the nice edition. And I decided, you know what? These are my really true fans. These are the ones that are kind of investing in my career, and they've like supported me all along. So what I've decided to do is anybody who gets that hardcover set, I'm just going to autograph all of them. So they're all the hardcovers are going to be signed.
My wrist is already sore for you.
Well, I'll take an hour or two to get them done, but they're so we'll have all that, and even as an upper level, that I'll even personalize the set at an extra $25 more or something like, because it is more work to go through and personalize all of them.
Oh yeah, a signature versus writing something. Yeah, of course.
So that'll be an option, and right now I'm working with our specialty printer, and we may, depending if I can get this done in the next week or so, we may even offer a special like leatherette gold stamped set on a higher end. So, and also I realized that maybe not all my science fiction fans even want the horror dark fantasy set,
Right.
or maybe the fantasy readers don't want the science fiction set or something. So
Yeah.
we broke it up. So if you just want to get the fantasy set, you can get that. Or if you just
Right.
want the science fiction, you can get that. Because to me, they're all my stories and they all fit together. And I know the different expectations of the different genres, but I write them all and I read them all, and I don't really think that you should read one and not the other. It's sort of like I'm a good cook, and I'll cook Italian one night and I'll cook
Right.
stir fry the next night, or I'll cook burgers the next night. I mean, to me, that's what the writing is all about. Oh, well, this one feels like a dark fantasy story, or this one's a hard cutting edge science fiction thing. And so I really hope people want the whole set, but we try to be accommodating. And besides, I have assistants to figure out the accounting and
Yeah,
and
of
break them
course.
all up. But here's, you asked about the special stuff. I'm going to reveal a secret to you, Mark, that you've known me a long time, but you don't know this, but I kind of like craft beer.
Oh,
And
no, I never knew that about you. You should have told me.
ah, so we decided that it was time. I'm actually doing a Kevin J. Anderson pint glass. It says it says, "This is an emergency. Bring me a pint and a Kevin J. Anderson novel," and that'll be available just for the Kickstarter people. And
Oh, wow.
just kind of fun things like that.
Yeah.
And we have, the higher end things that I'll do a specialized critique on the first 50 pages of your novel, and then I'll do a Zoom call with you if you're really into it. I've had one thing that's really specialized with this set, although I've offered it before. I'm still waiting for one person to take it. Like NFTs, you get like the one song that's recorded for you and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
everything. Well, I've got the diamond platinum level or whatever. If you want, I will write a short story for you that I'll send to you, and I'll delete it. So you have the only copy of that story ever, and I will never publish it.
Wow.
So if there's somebody out there who really wants to have the absolute exclusive limited collector's edition, something or other,
The one copy. Wow. That is wow.
then maybe we'll get some takers. We'll see.
That
Maybe
is
we'll get
interesting.
100 takers, and I'll be busy for the next year. But
Oh, that's true, because you can limit that, right? With Kickstarter, you can limit how many people get certain.
well, I'm not. I mean, if I get several, I'll just figure out how to write several stories. So
If only you knew how to come up with ideas for stories.
yes, that's never been a particular problem. But like, to get back to kind of the Kickstarter stuff. So the next one that I have running in the middle of summer, which isn't me, I'm just participating with it. There's a big tabletop game company that's going to make a fancy tabletop game out of my Saga of Seven Sons.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they're going to be running a Kickstarter on it. And I have just finished writing a brand new original novella for that. This is one of my most famous original series, the Saga of Seven Sons.
Yeah.
And I haven't written in that for 8-10 years, something like
Right.
that. So I wrote a brand new 25,000 word novella that is original. It's based around the scenario in this game, and we're going to publish that as a booklet, and it will be included in the game Kickstarter. So I'm working on that. And then, of course, sometime this fall, we're going to do another Dan Shamble Kickstarter, and I'm already planning the ones for 2025. So not that I've stopped doing the normal stuff. I've got a
Right.
big book from Weird Tales Presents and Blackstone that's coming out this fall, and I've got a sequel to that I'm supposed to be writing, and I do Dune graphic novels and things all the time. So it's never a dull moment, but
No.
Kickstarter has just opened a brand new door for me to get projects out there. Now, I do want to say this to get back to how this has changed.
Yeah.
You can watch my head get bigger here, but I've got 180 books published, and 58 of those were national or international bestsellers. I have over 24 million copies in print in 33 languages. If I went to any of my major publishers, Bantam, Tor, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, if I went to any of them and said, hey guys, I want to do a 7-volume hardcover set of my collected short stories. Who wants to bid the highest? They would literally laugh me out of the building.
Yeah.
I would never, ever, ever be able to publish a set of my short story collections because story collections don't sell. That's the common knowledge.
Right.
And I would never, I've always dreamed about collecting my stories. I've got 130 of them published. I would never get these collections done, but Kickstarter is going to let me do that.
Wow.
And I hope it's successful like the other ones have been. But it's, to me, that's just this paradigm shift that with a straight face, I can go out there and launch this Kickstarter for 7 books full of short stories when not even my most loyal editors at the biggest New York publishers would consider for a nanosecond.
Wow. That is a significant shift and a change. Now, I'm curious about how you approach it. So you work with several different large publishers. You work on numerous projects, screenplays. You've got all kinds of consulting on movies. You've got the books. You've got WordFire Press, where you're releasing some of your own stuff that way. How do you incorporate where Kickstarter fits into all of the pieces of the Kevin J. Anderson puzzle?
Well, it's only relevant to the ones that I'm going to publish myself, like a WordFire Press.
Right. Okay.
I mean, if it was a HarperCollins book, they would never consider a Kickstarter, and I would.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Now I can work together with other publishers. In fact, I've been involved with some other campaigns where a comic publisher wanted to include something of mine, or somebody else wants to release an anthology and they want a short story from me in it or something like that. But I publish several books of my own per year through WordFire Press. And because the Kickstarter has been such a huge boost, I'm now not 100%, but I'm considering doing like whatever book I want to do of my own. Well, we'll just do a Kickstarter first,
Right.
for the core fans, and then we'll publish it like normal for other people to buy on Amazon or wherever else.
Right.
But if you want the next Dan Shamble book, you need to support the Kickstarter, because then you get to read it 3 months before anybody else does.
Yeah.
If you don't care, well, then just buy it on Amazon afterward. But if you buy it on Amazon, I get like a tiny percentage of it. If you buy it by supporting the Kickstarter, well, then that comes directly to the creator. And, Jeff Bezos and I are both bald guys, and so are you. But, we don't need to give Jeff Bezos a lot more money. I spent enough time buying things on Amazon myself. But, well, and I do want to recommend that, because if you wait and buy it when it's regularly published, again, the creator just gets their and it's not a small percentage, because as an indie publisher, indie author, you do get a much bigger percentage. But it really helps if you can support us during the creating process.
Right.
And let me go back to kind of the way traditional publishing used to work. Is it was all set up that you would sell them a book that you were going to write. I would write a proposal, and then I'd send it around to Bantam and HarperCollins and Simon & Schuster, and my agent would take it out, and they would see which publisher wanted it, and if you were lucky, they might bid against each other. But then they would pay you in advance, which is the money you lived on while you wrote the book. Well, indie authors don't get any advance. They don't make a dime until they actually publish the book and they start getting their royalty streams in.
Right.
Kickstarter serves the purpose of providing me an advance, like living expenses, while I'm producing the book.
Right.
And it's kind of going back to the old model that I grew up in, except it's entirely funded by the readers rather than some conglomerate that owns the publishing house.
It allows the participation of the fans to be part of that process with you early on. But also the other thing that we haven't talked about is the fact that there was a time you could live off of advances from big publishers.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the other things is that now advances are. I mean, and I got some really big advances when I was in the 90s and stuff, that they were throwing out big advances and it was great. But then the advances have just collapsed, so that you can't live on, even a successful author can't really live on the advance that a regular publisher is handing out. And that's why again, I have spent so many years building up a very clear and direct connection with my readers and fans. I mean, I interact with them on Facebook and Twitter and through my newsletter and stuff all the time. And in fact, that leads me to another thing that I just decided last week about with this new Kickstarter, that I couldn't do this without the backers. I mean, I could not even conceive of this project if it weren't for the people who are going to support it. Persephone, my last one, had 943 backers.
Right.
I hope I get that many for this. I hope I get more. I mean, always. But I decided that I can't do this without them. And I had just been to the movie theater to watch Dune Part 2. And I'm co-producer on that movie. If you sit through the credits at the end, it's like the New York phone book that just goes up, and it goes on, and it's name after name. And I just thought, with this Kickstarter that I'm running now, I'm going to have a separate set of pages in the end of the very last volume where I'm just going to list the names of every single person who backed it.
Wow.
It's going to be my thank you to all of you guys, even if they only chipped in $5, that I can't. This project doesn't exist without the backers, and so they all get a tip of the hat at the end of the last one. So
wow,
anybody who joins in just gets their name. And I hope it looks like the New York City phone book at the end of it.
As you flip through it and you're like, wow, where's my name? And we're going to do the names randomly, so you have to read them all. You can't do alphabetical.
Well, it probably is. I mean, it's going to be the name that the order that they come in. So
just like in the movies, it's not alphabetical. It's like, what role are they going to do next? Where's Kevin going to come up?
Although I just realized, Mark, that a lot of your audience here might not remember what a phone book is. Those big paper things that just had people's names and phone numbers.
You sit on them so you can reach things when you're a little kid. So Kevin, where can people find out about this? So we're recording this on April 18th, 2024. The Kickstarter goes live when?
April 30th. So April 30th, and it will run for 3 weeks and 2 days. That might sound weird. It just means that we launch on a Tuesday and we end on a Thursday. That there are reasons for giving the audience that much, but so it's only 3 weeks, and after that's over, you'll be able to buy these. I mean, WordFire Press will release them, but it's not going to be for several months afterward. And like I was saying, we've done most of the work already. We are getting them finally proofed, and we're putting everything together. So my plan is to get these books into the hands of the backers within like less than 2 months before the campaign is over.
Oh man. Yeah. And the covers are gorgeous, because I know I've seen those. They're amazing. So we will have links of covers for the books on starkreflections.ca. We'll have a link to the Kickstarter, but where can people find out more about you, where you may have a link to this?
And here I was worried about, well, how do I list this big ugly URL and stuff? You know what the easy thing is? You go to Kickstarter.com and you search under Kevin J. Anderson, and that'll pop right up.
Easy enough.
That's the easiest way to find it, and just look on that. And one of the other things that we really are active on is I've got a whole bookstore that we built up, and I sign all the copies of all my books, and they can look under wordfireshop.com, and that's just all my Star Wars books and Dune books and Dan Shamble books and Dragon Business books and everything else that's on there that I've got signed stuff.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for hanging out with me again. And let's break some legs. Let's break some spines on this Kickstarter.
Well, I mean, the whole thing is that they supposedly build, and boy, I'm going to have to jump back on this podcast in like less than a year or so, because the one I've got started for next spring, I'm just going to anticipate things there. That's my coolest one ever. So,
oh, wow.
Information to come. So great to see you guys. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Mark.
Take care, Kevin. Okay, so I love chatting with Kevin. We are good friends. He is still a dear friend and a mentor to me. Always fun to hang out with him, and I get to enjoy some drinks with him when we are in LA. Especially since I just found out he actually likes craft beer, which I had no idea. But a couple reflections from some of the stuff that Kevin said. I want to draw attention, because we can all learn from this, to Kevin's very simple, very easy to understand, and yet so effective marketing log lines. I'll describe a couple of his series. So, Adam's Family meets The Naked Gun for the Dan Shamble series. That is so apt, so perfect, and it really captures it in a nutshell. And then, The Princess Bride meets Dirty Rotten Scoundrels for the dragon business. That's the joy, and yes, you have to dumb it down to something that's well-known and understandable. But what he does there is, if you are a fan of any of these things, you're going to immediately perk up and pay attention to them. And that's where, when I was trying to describe my Canadian werewolf novel, Stowaway, as Wolverine meets Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, because it's a humorous, thrilling adventure of a man guiding a young woman across on a long train trip, not cross country like in Wolverine, but it combines those elements. And so trying to find one or more elements of it's unique, the thing that you've written, but it also has to tie back to something known in the industry as a comp title, comparable title, or comp authors. So that's really critical, as you find some comp titles, and where's the crossover? Like, where's the Venn diagram of this? And so that is just absolute genius. So your homework, dear listener, is to look at the pitch and the log lines. Well, how do you describe this series, or how do you describe that novel? See if you can come up with something that very, very, very simple that kind of gets across the point of what it is. Love to hear some of your examples. Please leave the comments over at starkreflections.ca. I'd love to share them with folks. You can also email me, mark@markleslie.ca. That was really cool. And then I guess the other thing is, obviously the core topic of Kevin's perspective on what a Kickstarter is, what it was, and what it could be, and how that's been another layer that's been added in for multiple income streams. Obviously a common theme on this podcast. We talked about it in the previous episode with T-Thorn Coil, but I just love that approach, and look at what opportunities are there and how we can incorporate them, not by removing anything, but adding additional layers. So yes, I'm going to sell direct, and I have the ability, Kevin can sell direct at wordfireshop.com. Yes, he has the Kickstarter, so people can get access and early access and exciting opportunities to be part of this project. But it doesn't mean that he's not going to sell these on all the major retailers as well, that they're not going to be available to the libraries. There may be special editions that aren't available anywhere else. That's fine. But again, I go back to what Mitch Joel, digital marketing guru, has always said, is everything is with rather than instead of. So when a new technology comes along, you can incorporate that into the plan without necessarily replacing or removing those other things. It's just an additional opportunity, an additional way for people to access your work. So, great interview with Kevin. I will have a link to the Kickstarter that launches on April 30th. I am, like I said, hoping that this cold goes away. Thanks for bearing with listening to my stuffy head voice for this episode. I was gonna do the old AI voice, the Mark Leslie Lefebvre AI voice, but this actually takes less time for me to just turn on the mic and talk. But that is it for episode 357. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the podcast, I'd really appreciate if you leave a review on wherever you listen to podcasts, or better yet, share this episode with somebody that you think would find some valuable nuggets in it. So until next week, and until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you, dear listener, great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incompetech.com.